Have you ever wondered what it's like to do an advanced exam in the language you're learning? Well, I've recently passed the DELE C1, so if you want to know how to prepare for it, or if you're just wondering what it's like to sit a C1 exam, then I'll walk you through what the exam is, how I prepared, including the mistake that you definitely need to avoid, and what my experience was like actually doing the exam. This video is going to be a little longer than usual, so I'm going to put some timestamps below so you can just go to wherever is most useful for you. Personally, I found watching other people's DELE experience really helpful in getting me ready for the exam, so this is my effort to try and pay it forward and help anyone else interested. So the DELE is basically the most popular exam for Spanish. There are exams at all 6 levels of the CEFR, which is basically a way of listing the different levels of a language, and C1 is one of the advanced levels, which is the one that I did. So let's look at each part of the exam so you know what to expect. The first part is the reading section, but for a C1 exam, it involves something fairly complex like a car rental contract, or remember one of the practice tests I did involved reading health and safety guidance for using a chainsaw. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. You then have to answer multiple choice questions on whatever the topic is. In some sections, the language might be more academic or maybe slightly more narrative, and you're going to have to understand the implicit meaning behind the text. In the listening test, you do things like listen to maybe some kind of talk or interview and then select which of the statements apply to what was said. Again, there are slightly different elements in each part of the test, but one thing that often happens is you have to listen to something that's got terrible quality audio. It's really annoying, but they're trying to test your listening skills. On top of that, the writers of the exam are trying to catch you out. So the wording in the answers is always different from what the speakers say. And they'll often have answers that look similar, but are actually the opposite of what's been said. So you have to actually understand what people are saying rather than take a guess at it. I know that's annoying too, but that's sort of the whole point. It will test if you really do know Spanish. Everything's played twice, so you can just listen the first time and then select the answer when you listen again. So that's the reading and the listening parts. The next part of the DELE is the writing section, which mixes in listening too. So first, you have to listen to a presentation and then take some notes on it, and then answer a question on it by writing a short essay or a report on what you heard. That's the first half, and then in the next part, you choose one of 2 topics and then answer a question relating to either some data or maybe a short article that's been presented there. Now, all of those parts, the reading, writing and listening, they all take place on the same day. The speaking exam could be a day either side though. So they let you know something like 10 days before the main exam. Now, as you can imagine, for the speaking exam, it's not just a matter of turning up and having a nice chat. As nice as that would be. So first of all, you have 20 minutes of preparation. You read a short article and then you prepare a presentation on it. Once that 20 minutes is up, you then go straight into the exam room to do the presentation, which lasts around 3 to 5 minutes. They then ask you questions on it to get you to explain it in more depth. You do get the notes you made in front of you, but the whole point is you should be speaking with your examiner rather than just constantly trying to read off them. In the last part, you then have a sort of negotiation where you're shown 4 pictures and you basically have to do some sort of role play with the examiner, like decide what present to buy for someone or maybe choose the logo for a client's new business. We'll talk about my experience on the day during the oral part because, well, it wasn't quite what I expected. So those are the tasks for the C1 exam, but how do you know if you've passed? Well, the short answer is you'll get an email telling you your result. There are no fancy certificates that get sent out these days, which is a bit of a shame. It's entirely electronic. But in order to know how to pass, it's important to understand a little bit more about the marking system. So it is designed so that if you're weaker in one area, your stronger area can at least still try and help you pass. So what does that mean? Well, the reading and writing exams are grouped together, and then the listening and the speaking parts are also grouped together. So each one of those 4 parts individually gets a score of 25 to make a total of 100. And then in order to pass the exam, you need to get 60%, which is a score of at least 30 in each of those 2 groups. So the scores for reading and writing will need to add up to at least 30, and your scores for listening and speaking will need to add up to at least 30. If you can do that, that's a pass. So theoretically, if you have an absolute nightmare and you only get, say, 5 out of 25 for, say, your reading exam, if you got 25 points for the writing section, together that still adds up to 30. So you'll get a pass for that group. To score well, as strange as it sounds, you just have to show that your Spanish is at a C1 level. So grammatical accuracy, using varied vocabulary, maybe sprinkle in some specific idioms and then show that you can actually use the subjunctive. On top of that, particularly for the writing and the speaking tasks, make sure you actually answer the question. None of the questions will be, how good is your Spanish? So you have to demonstrate your Spanish whilst at the same time providing a structured answer for whatever it is that you've been asked. So that's what the exam involves. Let's next take a look at how I prepared and what resources to use so you can save yourself a lot of stress by avoiding my big mistake. For context, up until the point I booked the exam, I focused on just generally picking up the language. So I got a lot of exposure from, say, YouTube, podcasts and reading, as well as just having conversations with tutors online. Eventually, I added some more structured systems like using a pocket notebook to review short phrases that I wanted to remember, as well as starting to journal, both of which really helped boost my Spanish and take me to a more advanced level. But the mistake I made was this. I thought about doing the DELE for ages. In fact, probably about a year beforehand. And because I spent so long thinking about whether I should do it, by the time I finally booked and actually started preparing, I only had 3 weeks to get ready. But even just getting ready for the exam improved my Spanish. So if I just committed to it a year before, I would have made that progress so much earlier. So if you're thinking about whether or not to do the exam, you should just do it. It will help your Spanish regardless of the result that you get. So I was left with 3 weeks to just crack on and try and make a success of it. Now, there were 2 things that I focused on. One is to improve my accuracy and expressions to be at around a C1 level, which I'll give you some tips for in a second. But also, just focusing on your Spanish isn't enough. You can have amazing Spanish, but if you don't answer all of the questions in time, you're not going to pass. So you have to spend some time understanding how the exam works. The course that I used was the A por el DELE course, and I think they have sales throughout the year, so just keep an eye out. It's really in depth, and it covers each element of the exam and how to manage your time, importantly. However, it did leave me with a problem. I was left trying to split my time between watching the course to understand what I should do and actually doing some practice papers to understand what the exam was like. So I would first do some practice papers to just get some experience, and then I'd watch the relevant part of the A por el DELE course to learn how I should have done it. And then I'd go back and do another practice paper to try and put those techniques and time management advice into practice. That workflow really helped, and it consolidated what I was learning, and I got to the end of that first practice book thinking that I might actually pass. But when I got to the next book, it was way harder, and my confidence definitely took a knock. Honestly, I started to wonder if I'd been kidding myself about my level of Spanish and whether I really could pass the exam. However, if you have a crisis of confidence in your preparation time, like I did, don't stress, because if I can pass it, then so can you. On top of the course and the practice papers, I worked with a tutor online. To be completely transparent, I actually started working him before I booked the exam. And so we did some mock oral tests for maybe a couple of months. But it was only 2 weeks before the exam that I watched the module on the speaking part, and I'd realized I'd been basically winging it the entire time. So I then started to follow some repeatable steps like covering the source first and then giving the key points and then a personal evaluation on it. Just having a format I could follow each time meant I felt more prepared, and so regardless of whatever topic came up, I felt I could do it. So each lesson with my tutor, I'd basically run through that speaking exam, but with less prep time. Now, I was probably doing maybe 1 to 2 lessons a week with the tutor leading up to the exam, as well as having my normal conversation classes. So in that 3-week window I had, I probably did like 8 or 9 lessons. The last thing I did to prepare was doing some practice writing tests and get some feedback from my tutor who had experience with the DELE. You could actually do that with AI, but I don't think the advice will be as good. But that said, it's better than nothing. So if I were to do it again, I'd give myself at least 3 months to prepare. Not just to get ready for the exam, because regardless of the result, the more time you spend focusing on your Spanish, the more it will improve, which is really the whole point of doing this. The course, A por el DELE, massively helped, but I needed a lot more time to make the most of it, and I didn't even get to the end. And of course, more time doing practice tests would have definitely made a difference. Yes, it's practice for the exam, but also it gives you more opportunities to see those advanced words and phrases which might come up on the day too. To remember them, I used a combo of using paper notebooks and recording audio on my phone so I could listen throughout the day, but obviously use whatever works for you. Now, one thing that made an instant difference to my speaking was adding more connectors when I spoke. So things like por lo tanto, a pesar de eso. It instantly makes your Spanish sound so much better. So pick 5 that you actually use, say, in English, and use whatever the Spanish equivalent is as much as you can to try and ingrain it. I also try to sprinkle in a few common idioms too, like un arma de doble filo, la otra cara de la moneda, no es un camino de rosas. These tweaks will help to boost your Spanish quickly. So that was my prep, or lack of. What was the exam like? So I had the speaking exam on one day with the other exams the day after. Now on day 1, when I got to the Instituto Cervantes, all of the staff only spoke to me in Spanish, which was a nice warm-up before the test. When I then got to the room to do my 20 minutes of prep, something that I didn't expect was that there was another student there already getting ready. They left at one point, and then another student came in whilst I was still planning my presentation. So bear in mind that you won't necessarily have complete silence as the invigilator has to explain some instructions to whoever comes in. There was a choice of 2 articles to do my presentation on. I picked one, and then after my 20 minutes of prep, it was then my turn to go into the room. Initially, I felt nervous, but I hadn't taken into account that being a Friday afternoon, the woman who I was speaking to was clearly really bored and ready to go home. I found myself being extra animated to try and get some rapport with her instead of just focusing on my Spanish, which would have been a much better idea. And so bear in mind, you're going to have to interact with someone as best you can. So just try and stick to whatever your game plan is. The presentation went fine, I think. We discussed it, which I think also went more or less okay. But for the final role play, we then had to negotiate which picture we would choose for a photography competition. Now, I've heard other students say that the examiner just generally asked a few questions. They just agreed on which picture to select between the 2 of them, and that was pretty much it. But I was going back and forth for what seemed like an absolute age with this lady, trying to convince her that the image that I selected was the best, and she wouldn't budge at all. And the more I spoke, the more risk I had of making more mistakes, which of course would drag down my mark. In the end, I agreed to just go with the one that she wanted so that we could finish the task. It was a relief when it was finally over, to be honest. I then had a 2-hour journey home and then got up at 5 a.m. the next day to go back for the next series of tests. Now, on day 2, it was at a different venue, first of all, and awkwardly, I think the woman at reception thought I was an invigilator, which I'll take as a compliment for my accent, but she directed me to a room, which then turned out to be a meeting of all the other invigilators, and a very grumpy man shooed me out the building and told me to go and wait outside. Anyway, eventually, once I finally started the first exam, the invigilator there was extremely distracting throughout all 3 exams. So she was doing things like eating grapes out of a noisy packet at one point, or asking to check our IDs after the exam had already started. I know it sounds a bit random to mention it, but like the bored woman I spoke to in the oral, be prepared for other distractions. Anyway, despite all that, I got through the first paper, which was the reading one. There was stuff about a business contract, something around tourist locations in South America. It's all the kind of stuff that you get in the practice exam, so it wasn't anything too bad. But here's where time management is important. The questions for the listening section are in the same book as the reading one. So if you finish the reading part early enough, you can quickly look through the listening questions. You don't really want to be reading those questions at the same time as you're trying to listen to the audio and select the right answer. So to give you an idea of what to expect, one of the parts of the listening paper was an interview about a drone piloting organization in Colombia. The Spanish wasn't too bad, but the audio was awful. It had some kind of like intermittent music in the background, which sort of sounded like it was coming from the flat next door to whoever this speaker was. Be prepared for bad audio, basically. Also, bear in mind that there's going to be a variety of accents, so listen to as many as you can before you go into the exam. I didn't think the listening section was too bad, to be honest, despite the terrible audio, but I do a lot of listening. So easy habits like listening to podcasts every day will get you ready for the exam. There was then a 45-minute break before the final writing paper, which starts with listening to some kind of presentation. As soon as the audio instructions started playing, I wrote down useful connectors, and then I wrote down some sentence starters and whatever idioms that I could remember on the spare paper so that I had some prompts if I needed them. The presentation was on España vaciada, which is a subject that just genuinely interests me. However, I don't know if it was the sugar and the caffeine that I had in the break or the fact that I was writing about a topic I was interested in, but I lost track of time and I really didn't have much time for the second question. In that second part, I wrote a letter to an editor of a newspaper. It was definitely rushed and probably dragged down my score a little, so make sure that you have enough time for each part of the test. Now, despite all of the stress around the exam, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. When you sign up, you're told that you'll get your grades within 3 months, but if you speak to most tutors, they'll tell you that it's normally closer to 2. However, for me, it was over 3 months of waiting without any updates whatsoever, which was absolutely brutal. I heard various theories online as to why that was, but either way, prepare yourself for a long wait. But eventually I did get the email saying I passed, which felt like a really nice achievement and a milestone for my Spanish. Now, I actually got more out of doing the exam than just getting a PDF certificate saying that I passed a C1 exam. Having that goal in the back of my mind helped keep me consistent with my Spanish, even if I didn't actually book it until the last minute. So putting yourself forward for something like this is of course going to feel scary. But doing it anyway will build your resilience for doing other hard things in the future. And it's definitely given me more confidence in my Spanish level. Now, C1 doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes. I still make little errors all the time and I'm working on them, but it's a confidence boost to know that I put my Spanish to the test and I passed. As adults, we often don't get little rites of passage like this where you have to do a hard thing and show up for it. So I'm really glad that I did. So if you're even thinking about doing the DELE, whatever level, I think you should just book yourself in for it and do it. Honestly, it's probably the fear of failure holding me back that stopped me from actually committing earlier. But if I had, I would have improved sooner, which would have been a win, and regardless of whatever happened in the exam. One of the best things I did to improve my Spanish, though, to the point that I could take the C1 exam, was starting to journal in Spanish, which is exactly what I'll show you in this next video. Thanks for watching.